Most people have no idea that the story of Jesus is actually about three different men. Not one person with three separate names, but three separate beings who each carried a version of the Christos mission around the same time period. One of them was deeply aligned with restoring humanity's original genetic blueprint, the divine blueprint. Another had heavy genetic distortion, and his teachings became the root of religious control. And the third is the one whose story got twisted into the crucifixion narrative that we all know today. I know this is mind-blowing, so buckle up because today's episode is going to be a lot. The version of Jesus that survived history is a carefully blended version of each three of these beings. When you hear me talk about Yeshua, I'm always referring to J12. I'll go into the differences in a little bit. And almost everything that we've been told about what happened was deliberately changed on purpose. Today, we're going to break down exactly who these three Christs were, why they chose to incarnate when they did, where they came from, and what their real missions were, and how their stories became so distorted. Around 2,000 years ago, Earth was going through a very specific time cycle where certain Stargate frequencies were beginning to open. Stargate frequency windows, to be more specific. This created a rare opportunity for higher level intervention. The Guardian groups, remember how I was talking about those cloistered races? They saw that humanity and the planet were headed into an even deeper level of distortion. So they initiated what's called the Christos realignment mission. Because the level of interference and distortion on Earth at this time was so incredibly high, they didn't just put the entire mission on one person. Instead, they worked through three different beings, each one with different genetic strengths and focuses. This was a backup strategy in case one or more of them became compromised. First, and the most important of these three, was Yeshua 12, J12. When you read the Acoustic Bible, I'm referring to J12. He carried the strongest indigo and Magi Grail genetics and had a much clearer connection to the Guardian Alliance and the Emerald Covenant. Yeshua 12 chose to incarnate during this specific time period because the planetary grids and Stargate alignment allowed for the possibility of reopening the Ark of the Covenant, which is a major portal system that had been closed for a very, very long time. His mission was to anchor high-frequency Christos energy into Earth's morphogenetic field and help restore the original 12-strand DNA template in most humans and realign the planetary grids back to their natural Christic structure. He was the one who was most aligned with the original spiritual technology of DNA activation and light body restoration. The second being was Yeshua 9. He also carried indigo genetics, but his line had significant Anunnaki blending. This made his mission much more difficult and compromised from the very beginning. Bloodlines matter. I want you to remember that. While he did carry a version of the Christos mission, his genetic distortion made him more vulnerable to outside interference. Over time, parts of his teachings were twisted and used to create religious structures based on external salvation, hierarchy, and control, rather than inner activation and sovereignty. Much of what later became mainstream Christianity actually traces back more to his compromised line than to the original mission of Yeshua 12, J12. And the third being was Adiabi. He came from a more standard human 12 tribes genetic line with much less indigo coding than the other two. Those of you who don't know what this coding means, I will make another video to explain it later on. His role was much more focused on physical resistance and challenging the controlling powers of that time period. He was more grounded in the physical and political struggles of that era. His story became the most associated with conflict, betrayal, and the crucifixion and the historical records. The dramatic events that most people associate with the death of Jesus actually belonged primarily to Ariabi, not to Yeshua 12. All three of these men incarnated into the very narrow window of time, because that was when the planetary frequencies and Stargate alignments made this kind of intervention possible. Remember, God is a mathematician. It was a critical period where real change could still be made before certain distortions became permanent inside the planetary grid. Each one had a different piece of the overall mission, and they were meant to work with the guardian forces behind the scenes. However, heavy interference from intruder races, most specifically the Anunnaki factions, made the mission extremely difficult. Genetic blending, frequency manipulation, and direct targeting of these three individuals created massive distortion. After their lifetimes, religious and political powers took fragments of these events and blended them together into one figure we now know as Jesus. They removed almost everything related to DNA activation, light body work, and personal sovereignty. What remained was a story that was focused on external salvation, sin, and worship over Christic embodiment. This version kept people disconnected from their own divine blueprint rather than helping them remember it. This distortion was not accidental. It served the agenda of two groups who wanted to maintain control over human consciousness and prevent people from reclaiming their original 12-strand genetic potential. By turning the Christos mission into a religion of passive waiting and external authority, they effectively neutralized what most of these three beings came to do. What's most important to understand is that the real Christos mission was not about creating a new religion. It was about restoring humanity's original connection and divine blueprint to the higher levels of their consciousness. The OG divine blueprint, the same 12-stranded DNA and light body fields that existed before Tara's planetary fall and frequency distortions. Yeshua 12 was working specifically to reopen these pathways so that eventually people could activate their 12-strand template and activate this genetic potential rather than depending upon an external savior. Even though the mission was heavily interfered with 2,000 years ago, the same Christos frequencies and DNA activation has now become available again. That window that opened up back then is opening again, but in a new form during this current time cycle. This is why so many people are feeling a deep pull to remember who they really are and activate their own original blueprint. The story of the three Christ isn't just ancient history. It's a mirror of what's happening right now. The same forces that distorted the mission back then are still active today, and the same opportunity to reclaim the Christ consciousness is available to anyone who is willing to do the inner work. If you've ever felt that the version of Jesus that was actually taught isn't what your soul remembers, you're not alone. The real mission was about remembering and activating your own divine nature and reactivating what was always inside of you. So I have put together some things for you if you want to take that deeper dive into understanding what all this is about. I've put a webinar for you to check out on your own time. But today's episode is very, very important, and I know it's a lot to process. You can take what resonates and leave what doesn't. But like I said, I'm just the messenger. Until next time.